All right, welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you can join us for our 7th episode of the Perfect Tips and Tricks with OESD. I'm Carrie, and very excited to be back here again with you. Hope you're all doing well and stitching out there in the world. I love to see everything you're working on, so please keep posting on the Perfect Stitch, the projects you're working on. It's just super wonderful to see everybody's projects, and I know all of you love to see everyone else's. It's such an inspiration to see what everybody's working on, to see different colorways of things. And don't forget, as always, to leave love for your local store. We are thinking of them and want to send them as much love as possible, and I know you guys are super committed to sharing the word about your local stores. So in the comments, feel free to shout out your local store and where you're from. We love to hear that. We are nothing without our local stores and all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So today I have with me Sharon Smith. She's hiding in the background. I'll introduce her in just a second. She is going to teach us all about tiling scenes. So Sharon is an educator of ours, and she is so knowledgeable. Sharon is just as steady as a rock, and I love working with her because she is unshakable and always able to really just teach to anybody. So if you have taken a class from Sharon, definitely let me know and show her some love in the comments. So I am going to kick it over to Sharon. Sharon, yep, it is your turn to turn that back on. And are you over there, Sharon?
I'm here.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks, Carrie. Put the pressure on me.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, you are going to teach all of these people about tiling scenes. So it is your turn and you are on.
All right, thank you. Well, hi, everybody. I'm excited to talk about tiling scenes. I've done several of them the past couple of years, and I just love them. The ones we have are just beautiful. The way we start out, first thing you want to do is when you get your tiling scene collection, you definitely want to print out those instructions. Carrie's talked about this earlier in some of our other episodes. It's that sewing guide. It'll be a PDF file on your collection that you get either in CD or USB stick. So you want to make sure you print those out because it's going to give you your thread charts. It's going to give you your supplies, as well as this chart. It's going to tell you how to lay out all your tiles after you stitch them out. So the supplies that we're going to use, this one in particular calls for heavyweight tearaway, as well as ultra clean and tear. And I'll talk about why we use those in a second. And I always use fusible woven on my background fabric. I just feel like these tiling scenes, some of them can be very stitch intensive, and I just want my fabric to have a little more body to it. So I know Carrie, that's her favorite thing is the fusible woven, and it's one of my favorites as well. So I always put fusible woven on the back of my background. Another thing I want to talk about real quick is the threads. We're going to be using all of our thread charts use the Isocord thread. And y'all know that you can stitch our designs out with any branded thread. It doesn't matter what you use. But on our tiling scenes, I really recommend using the Isocord thread. It's got this, that's how you're going to get the shading that we have. These beautiful shading techniques that we have on these tiling scenes is because of that Isocord thread. It's got over 400 colors in the brand, and they're able to get that shading with it. I usually like to explain that with, let's say that a tiling scene calls for 5 different shades of white. That I think Isocord has 5 different shades of white, and maybe you're using another brand, you can only use 2. Has 2 whites. So you're trying to convert those 5 shades over to just those 2 shades. And so you're not going to get that shading that you normally would. So if you don't normally use Isocord in your designs, we do make thread kits for our tiling scenes. I think most of the newer ones and some of the older ones that are really popular, we do have thread kits for those. So it's a great way to start maybe collecting Isocord. And then you also have every single color you need for that tiling scene that you're working on. So I really recommend maybe getting those thread kits. So to start out with, on the instructions, they're going to tell you you're going to hoop 2 layers of the heavyweight tearaway and also 1 layer of ultra clean and tear, as well as your background fabric. So I've kind of showed you on here. I'm using a larger hoop when I do mine because I want to be able to get 2 tiles in 1 hoop. kind of makes it seem like it's going to go by faster by doing that. If you do use a larger hoop and you can get more than one tile in that hoop, you definitely want to make sure you space them out. Okay, you don't want them right up next to each other. And I'll talk about our seam allowance in a few minutes, but you want to make sure that you leave enough room for that seam allowance between those tiles. So when I put 2 of them in this in particular, in this hoop, I actually will leave about 1.5 inches between the 2 tiles to make sure I have that seam allowance, that room for that seam allowance. So what you're going to do, you're going to stitch out your tiles. And if you will notice, let me see if I can get this where you can see it. On the thread chart, the last stitch on the thread chart for each tile is called a seam stitch. And on that seam stitch, that's just a line that goes around the outside of the tile. You want to change your bobbin thread to a different color. And I will show you on this right here. I stitch with black bobbin on these because I'm using a dark fabric. Most of the threads I'm using are grays and blacks and stuff. So I decided to use a black bobbin when I stitched out the tile. So when I got to the last stitch for that tile, I changed it to a red bobbin thread so I can see that. It's very important that you can see that seam stitch because that's what you're going to use to trim your seam allowance. If you notice on this, let me see if this is better. On this one, you can see some of the stitching actually extends beyond that seam stitch. And the reason we do that is because when you start piecing these tiles together, you know, if you're not so perfect, you know, getting them next to each other on that seam line, then you're not going to have a big old blank space between the 2 tiles. We got some filler for you is what I call it. But that's definitely another reason why you need to change your bobbin thread. So when you trim, if I would have kept that in black, there's no way I would have been able to tell what was the seam stitch and what was just part of the design. So again, I changed mine to a different color, and then I'm ready to, I know where that seam stitch is. All right, something else you want to do. After you finish, let me see if I can see, here we go. I always take mine and I number the tiles. Because as you get going, this particular one I'm doing is Santa's Workshop, and it has 32 tiles to it. And some of them are going to start looking almost alike when I start stitching them out. And if I don't know what it is, I might line it up in the wrong spot when I start sewing them together. So I always put a number on the back side, and I always put it in the same corner. So mine's always on the top right corner when I label them. That way, when I lay them out, then I know which one it is. Okay, so after we get all our tiles stitched out, all we're going to do is we're going to start piecing them together. And let me find my chart again. This chart is really good. Y'all can see that. It's going to tell you how to lay them out. This particular one, it goes down in columns. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. So I will stitch them out in columns. And I will just start with 1 and 2. And my little trick for sewing them together to make sure they all match. And I'm telling you, if you trim them exactly, this is where it's really important to make sure you trim exactly a 1/2 inch, is when you start putting them together, all I have to do is lay them together. And I know because I cut them correctly, the seam allowance correctly, they're going to lay correctly together. So I will lay 1 and 2 right sides together, make sure they're oriented correctly, and they're not. So usually I lay it like this, and then I flip it down. If y'all are quilters, y'all kind of know how this kind of works. But if you notice, they're perfect. Okay, so when I cut them, they're all going to line up right. And then I just use these Wonder Clips. I love these things because pinning these, there's just too many layers to pin it. So I will use these Wonder Clips. And then you're just going to take this to your sewing machine, and you're going to stitch the tiles together. My little tip for stitching them together is I use a foot that has a little mark down the center, and I will line that center mark on the foot up with my seam line, and then I move my needle position 1 position to the left, and that way when I sew, I follow the seam stitch with that mark on my foot, but my needle is stitching just inside that seam stitch line. That way when I press them open, I don't see that seam stitch line, which is, you don't really want to see that. So that just is kind of your guide when sewing them together. So a little tip for sewing together. Another thing you want to do when you sew them is I always like to use a walking foot or a I forgot. Oh, a dual feed foot. Sorry, I just lost my words. A dual feed foot or like a walking foot, because that'll keep your layers from shifting. All right. So once we get them sewn together, if I can get my camera to move over here, let me show you what we're going to do next. The next thing you want to do down there. Next thing you want to do is you want to press your seams open. Now, on your instructions, they're going to tell you to press them or to tear the stabilizer out of the seam allowance first. And this is why we use tearaway, because we need the heavyweight tearaway to support the stitches, but we want it to be a tearaway so we can tear the stabilizer out of the seams. That kind of reduces the bulk of the seam allowances. And the instructions will tell you to tear the stabilizer out of the seam allowance before you press it open. I found when I did that it made the seams kind of wimpy and it was very hard to open them up. So what I will do is I will actually press them open first. And I love using this tool of ours. This is a perfect point and press tool. It's got 2 different size tips on it. A lot of people use it for turning their corners on bags and such, or mug rugs and things, and also maybe for turning straps. But I found a great another use for this is I take the large tip and I will run it along the seam allowance. All right. And it just helps me with all this bulk in here, the extended stitching and stuff. It's really hard to open up those seams. So I will open that up with this perfect point and press tool first, and then I will press that open. I don't think my iron is hot anymore. Let me get that going. And then I use a wooden clapper. If y'all aren't familiar with wooden clappers, this is back from garment making days. They would use this a lot to get the really crisp seams on their garments. And I found, I'm a quilter, and I found that when I use a clapper on these seams, it just helps them lay down nice and flat. So the steam from the iron, the heat from the iron, the wooden clapper absorbs it, and it just helps press those seams nice and flat. And then when you're done, you can see how nice and flat those seams are. Perfect. I love when they match up. So a little tip, you're going to continue on. You're going to continue on your columns, and then you're going to sew your columns together. And you will do those the same way. When you put the columns together, I always match my seams first. So I'll put my wonder clips. Let's say I've got one right here. I would put these together, and I would put my wonder clips on these seams first and do all the seams, and then I would kind of fill in with wonder clips, and then I would sew those 2 columns together. All right, and again, you'll do the same thing, and then when you're done, after you press them open, you're going to tear your stabilizer out of the seam allowance. And you don't have to be perfect. All right, I just get a little bit out as much as I can just to reduce the bulk of that seam allowance, and it helps it lay nice and flat. Let me see what else I got. I think I got everything.
So Sharon, how do you quilt yours? Sorry if you were going to talk about that.
No,
but
that's
I know that's a question we get.
That's a good prompt. So after you finish the tiles, you're going to put them all together, 32 tiles together, and then you're going to, I got half of mine. I'll show you half of it. I'm working on 2 of these right now. I got half of it done. So you can see the other half would be the same. I just attach it. All right. And then when you're finished with the top, you're going to layer that with your batting and your backing. I always cut those about 2 or 3 inches bigger than the top, and you'll layer them all together. And then I just stitch in the ditch. All right. I use a visible thread on the top, and I match my thread to my back fabric on my bobbin, and I stitch in the ditch. Very easy. You don't want to take anything away from these types of quilts or tiling scenes because it's just too busy already. So I don't want to do any type of quilting other than stitch in the ditch. And that's just mainly to pull the 3 layers together.
Absolutely.
And then after you're done, you're just going to bind it like you usually would. That's one thing that I see a lot of questions and stuff is people think we put batting in when we're stitching out the design. We do not add batting while we're stitching the design. It's just your stabilizer and your background fabric. You don't want all that bulk in there while you're stitching it. That's done afterwards. It's very, very similar to making a quilt, if you're familiar with that, is that you're doing your top, which is the tiling seam, and then you're layering it with your batting and your backing.
Yep, and somebody commented, and I think this is a good point, that when you're pressing, and I think you do this, they use a pressing mat underneath the clapper.
I do. Thank you.
Yep, it
Yes, I
helps
do.
kind
I
of
do.
cushion it.
Yes, I always put mine, my pressing cloth on my ironing board when I press because, first of all, it keeps it from flattening the design out. I love our pressing cloth. It's just amazing. I know we talked about that in some of our other videos. It's not made out of wool, so if you're allergic to wool, you don't have to worry about, anything like that. It's natural fibers. Fold it up, put it away if you want to. If you notice, I stitched out pressing cloth on mine. Because it does kind of look like batting and I don't want it to end up in one of my tiling seams. So I stitched pressing cloth on all my pressing cloths that I have. And we do make a big one. It's really good for tiling seams. I don't have mine out right now, but instead of trying to move the columns and the whole tiling seam down on your ironing board to make it on top of your press cloth, we do have one that fits your entire ironing board, so to keep you from having to constantly move down your stuff while you're ironing it. I think that's. Oh, I do have a little trunk show if you want to see the trunk show.
I think people definitely want to see your trunk show.
I pulled out my tiling seams I had in my sample truck, and this is Starry Night. I love Starry Night. I'm just amazed at our digitizers. They take artwork and they put these stitches in and they just make them where it looks like a piece of art. It's just amazing. So that's Starry Night. I'm actually getting ready to do 2 more of those. This is Oh Holy Night. This was one that came out last year. And all 3 of these that I've shown so far, Starry Night, Santa's Workshop, and Oh Holy Night, are by the same artist, Donna
Gelsinger.
Thank you.
Yeah, Donna Gelsinger.
I didn't know with a D. I didn't know if I could pronounce it right.
You got it. She's a wonderful artist, and we're so lucky to work with her. Yeah.
Yeah, she is absolutely amazing. So, and I did want to show another one. If you're new to tiling seams, this is called Modern Petals. And this is one that if you didn't want to do, it just gives you a bunch of different designs on squares. So if you're new and all these tiling seams seem overwhelming, this would be a perfect one for you to start with because you can make one tile and you can make a coaster out of it. You could do 4 of them and put them together and make a little table topper. You can make it a little bigger like this and make a larger table topper. You could put them together as a table runner. We have another one called it's Modern Geometrics, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah,
very similar, but more geometric designs. But those two are those are ones you could break out and not feel like you have to do 32 tiles if you're very new to this. But it would help you practice, matching up your seams and just the whole process. This is probably really popular as well. It's still a tiling seam, but it's kind of done differently. The middle is done very similar to what I talked about with the Santa's Workshop. So these all get put together. These are different tiles. And then on this, you're going to add sashing between these tiles. All the instructions, again, are going to be on your PDF file.
And what's the name of that one, Sharon?
This one is the Sewing Quilt.
Thank you.
80071. And I got one more. This is another one that's popular. This is another one that has the sashing between it and the borders. So again, you'll stitch out all the tiles and then the instructions on the PDF file will show you how to put it together.
Awesome.
Just a couple of different ways. Unless anybody's got any more questions, of course, we'll answer them in the comments if you're watching this at a later time.
Yep. Thanks,
That's
Sharon.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. That was really awesome. We got lots of great comments. People will be rewatching this one for sure as a reference. So we appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right.
See y'all again.
So that was amazing information. I wanted to show you while Sharon was talking. I remembered that I have a sample. So this is that modern geometrics that Sharon was talking about, the tiles. And this is just turned into a pillow. So if you feel overwhelmed by trying to take on, one of our beautiful big Donna Gelsinger scenes, you can start here. So this is the same tile done on 2 different fabrics. and just sewn together the same way Sharon talked about, and then just made into a pillow. But you could make a table topper or a runner. You don't have to start with the biggest project. If you're one of those people, that's great, but you don't have to. There are many simple projects that you can do that don't involve kind of such an investment of time. So really quickly, I wanted to show you the products that Sharon talked about today. So Santa's Workshop Tiling Scene by Donna Gelsinger, like she mentioned, that is 80146. Heavyweight tearaway. So on the Donna's on my words I've lost them today. On Donna's Tiling Scenes, we suggest 2 layers of heavyweight tearaway and 1 layer of fusible woven. And we get this question all the time. It seems like so much stabilizer. It's hard to get in the hoop, lots of things. And that's not incorrect. But when you have so many stitches, those are very stitch intensive. You really need to support that. So 2 layers of heavyweight tearaway, and you interface your cotton with the fusible woven. So that works best for us. The fusible woven, again, my favorite product. This is an interfacing, so it's not necessarily a stabilizer on its own. So you fuse this to the back of your fabric before you embroider on it. So it's almost like a pre-treat of the fabric. And then the Perfect Embroidery Press Cloth, we have that in 2 sizes, in the smaller size and also the ironing board size. I have one on my ironing board now. Love it. Use it all the time for everything. And then the Expert Point and Press tool. If you don't have one of these, it's one of those tools in your work on your workbench you will reach for over and over again. It's got 2 little tips, a tiny pointy tip and a bigger pointy tip. Great for turning straps, for using as Sharon did. Just a really useful, versatile tool. And tomorrow's episode, this is not correct because this was today. So tomorrow's episode, I will actually be your special guest. I have a really great tutorial for you guys featuring a brand new release that will drop tomorrow. So I hope you can join me tomorrow for a tip from me featuring a new release, which I will show off tomorrow. I'll leave you in suspense a little bit on that one. But thank you, as always, for joining us. Leave your questions in the comments. We love hearing from you every day. This has been such a joy for us to do, and we're glad you are enjoying it as well. It's going to keep on happening. So thank you. Happy stitching. We will see you tomorrow.